The blood on Bridget's hands had long since dried by the time she stumbled into Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory, in the scorching summer of 1872. Her worn boots kicking up dust with each exhausted step, as she clutched the small pouch containing everything she owned in this world. She had walked for 3 days straight after fleeing the mining camp where her father had died in a cave collapse, leaving her alone at 19 years old with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few coins he had saved. The other miners had looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl, and she had known instinctively that staying there would mean a fate worse than starvation. So she had run, heading south toward civilization, toward Fort Sumner, where her father had once told her honest people lived and worked. The main street stretched before her now, lined with wooden buildings that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon heat. A saloon stood on one corner, its doors swinging as men entered and exited. Across the street, a general store advertised supplies and dry goods. Further down, she could see a boarding house, a blacksmith, and what looked like a land office. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and her vision swam with exhaustion and thirst. Bridget forced her feet to carry her toward the general store. She needed water first, then perhaps information about work. She could cook and clean, mend clothes and tend animals. Surely someone in this town needed help. Her dark blonde hair hung in a tangled braid down her back, and she knew she looked like something the wind had dragged across the desert, but she held her head high as she pushed open the door. The interior felt blessedly cool compared to the street. Shelves lined the walls, packed with goods from flour and sugar to tools and fabric. Behind a wooden counter stood a thin man with spectacles perched on his narrow nose, his lips pursed as he looked up from a ledger book. His gaze swept over her in an instant, taking in her dusty dress and desperate appearance. "Water, please," Bridget managed, her voice hoarse. "Just water." The clerk's expression remained unmoved. "We sell water by the dipper. 2 cents. She fumbled with the small pouch, extracting 2 precious pennies and placing them on the counter. The clerk took them with precise fingers and gestured toward a barrel near the door. She drank deeply, the cool water soothing her parched throat, and felt strength returning to her limbs. "I am looking for work," she said when she had finished, turning back to face him. "Cooking, cleaning, mending, anything honest." The clerk looked her up and down again, his expression skeptical. "Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house might need help, but she will want references." "I have none to give," Bridget admitted. "My father and I worked in the mining camps. He died last week." Mining camps. The clerk's tone suggested exactly what he thought of people from mining camps. "Well, you might try the boarding house anyway, or perhaps the saloon is hiring." His implication was clear and insulting. Bridget felt her cheeks flush but kept her composure. "The boarding house will do fine. Where might I find it?" 3 buildings down on the left. "But Mrs. Patterson will want you to sign the guest register if you are staying, and the employment contract if she hires you." "Then I shall speak with her," Bridget said, moving toward the door. "Can you write your name at least?" the clerk called after her, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Bridget stopped, her hand on the door frame. Shame heated her face, but she turned back and met his gaze steadily. "No, I never learned my letters. My father and I moved too often for schooling." The clerk made a sound of disapproval. "Mrs. Patterson will not hire someone who cannot even sign her own name. No respectable establishment would. How would you read recipes or take inventory or manage household accounts?" "I can count," Bridget said quietly. "And I remember recipes once I am shown. I managed well enough for my father." "In a mining camp, perhaps." The clerk pushed his spectacles up his nose. "This is a civilized town, girl. We have standards." The door opened behind Bridget, letting in a wave of heat and sunlight. She stepped aside automatically, and a shadow fell across the floor. The shadow belonged to a man so tall and broad that he seemed to fill the doorway, his shoulders nearly spanning its width. He had to duck slightly to enter, and when he straightened, Bridget found herself staring up at perhaps the largest man she had ever seen. He wore buckskin pants and a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, held back from his face with a strip of rawhide. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue-green that reminded her of the mountain streams from her childhood. A knife hung at his belt, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had never feared another living soul. "Mr. Pierce," the clerk said, his tone notably more respectful. "Good to see you. Come for your supplies." The mountain man nodded, but his gaze had moved to Bridget, taking in her dusty clothes and the exhaustion she could not quite hide. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Sir," Bridget murmured, stepping further aside to give him room. "This girl is looking for work," the clerk said, his earlier disdain returning to his voice. "I was just explaining that respectable establishments require employees who can read and write. She admits she cannot do either." Bridget wanted to sink through the floorboards. To have her shame announced so casually to this stranger felt like being stripped naked in the town square. She kept her eyes down, studying the scarred toes of her boots. "She cannot read or write," the mountain man repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "That is right." The clerk seemed to warm to his audience. "Can you imagine, in this day and age, a grown woman who never learned her letters? How does one function in civilized society? How does one sign contracts or read the Bible or keep accounts? It is shameful, really." The silence that followed felt heavy. Bridget forced herself to look up, ready to face whatever additional mockery the mountain man might offer. But when her eyes met his, she found no judgment there. Instead, he was looking at her with something that might have been curiosity or perhaps understanding. "Then I will read to her every night," the mountain man said. The words hung in the air. Bridget stared at him, uncertain she had heard correctly. The clerk's mouth had fallen open behind his counter. "I beg your pardon," the clerk managed. "If she needs reading, I will do it for her." The mountain man's gaze had not left Bridget's face. "Every night if need be." "Seems to me a person's worth is not measured by their letters but by their character and their willingness to work hard." Bridget felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. No one had ever defended her before, certainly not a stranger, and definitely not with such simple matter-of-fact conviction. "That is very kind of you to say, sir," she said quietly, "but you do not know me. I might be the worst sort of person." "Are you?" he asked. "No, sir. I am honest and hardworking, but I cannot prove it with words on paper." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Then you will prove it with your actions like the rest of us do. What kind of work are you seeking? Anything respectable? Cooking, cleaning, mending?" "I can tend animals and work a garden. I am strong and I do not mind hard labor." The mountain man nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. "I have a cabin about 5 miles north of town, up in the foothills. I am often away trapping and hunting for days at a time. The place needs tending, the garden needs keeping, and I could use someone to manage the household while I am gone. Room and board plus wages. The work is hard but honest." Bridget's heart began to beat faster. "You are offering me employment, just like that, just like that." He extended a large, calloused hand. "Name is Marcus Pierce. People call me Pierce, mostly." She took his hand, feeling her own disappear in his grip. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. Bridget Calloway. I accept your offer, Mr. Pierce, and I will work harder than any employee you have ever had. I believe you will. He released her hand and turned to the clerk. Put together my usual order, plus supplies for a second person, feminine necessities, whatever she might need. And I will need a spare bedroll and blanket. The clerk's expression suggested he had opinions about this arrangement, but he kept them to himself in the face of Marcus Pierce's steady gaze. Of course, it will take me a bit to gather everything. We will wait. Marcus gestured toward a bench near the window. Miss Calloway, you should sit. You look ready to fall over. She wanted to protest that she was fine, but her legs were indeed trembling with exhaustion. She sank onto the bench gratefully, and Marcus settled beside her. The bench creaked under his weight, and she realized that sitting, he was still nearly as tall as she was standing. Thank you, she said softly, not quite able to look at him. What you said just then, no one has ever spoken up for me like that. The clerk is a fool, Marcus said bluntly. My own mother could not read or write. She was one of the finest women I ever knew, raised 6 children mostly by herself while my father trapped. She kept us fed and clothed and taught us right from wrong, never needed letters for any of it. Your mother sounds wonderful. She was. Died 5 years back, fever took her. His voice held old grief, worn smooth by time but never quite fading. My father followed her 6 months later. Broken heart, I think, though the doctor said pneumonia. I am sorry for your loss. Bridget understood grief. Her own mother had died when she was 7, leaving her with only the haziest memories of a woman who smelled like bread and sang while she worked. What about your people? Marcus asked. My father died last week. Cave collapse at the mine where he worked. Before that, it was just the 2 of us, moving from camp to camp as the work demanded. She swallowed hard. The other men at the camp looked at me differently after he was gone. I knew I had to leave quickly. Marcus's jaw tightened. You did right. Mining camps are no place for a woman alone. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the clerk gather supplies from the shelves. Through the window, Bridget could see townspeople going about their business in the afternoon heat. A woman in a blue dress walked past with a basket over her arm. 2 men stood talking outside the saloon. It all looked so normal, so peaceful, like a place where people built lives instead of just surviving day to day. Your cabin, she said hesitantly. It truly needs tending. You are not offering me work out of pity. Marcus turned to look at her fully, and she found herself caught in that blue-green gaze. I do not do things out of pity, Miss Calloway. I do them because they make sense. I need help managing my place. You need work. That is a fair trade, seems to me. But I will be honest with you about the situation. Please do. The cabin is comfortable but simple. 1 main room with a loft. I sleep in the loft so you would have the main room for privacy. There is a good well, a barn for my horses and mules, a chicken coop, and a decent-sized garden plot. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, an older couple named the Hendersons. They are good people. Bridget nodded, absorbing this information. I am gone sometimes for a week or more at a time, Marcus continued, up in the mountains trapping or hunting for meat to sell in town. When I am home, I do the heavy work around the place, but the daily tending falls to me and has been neglected. I am a fair employer, but I expect honest work for honest wages. And I give you my word that you will be safe in my home. I am not the kind of man who would ever harm a woman or take advantage. The sincerity in his voice made her believe him. She had learned to read men quickly in the mining camps, to see the difference between those who meant harm and those who did not. Everything about Marcus Pierce spoke of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. When would you want me to start? She asked. Soon as we get the supplies loaded. unless you need to rest first. The cabin is a bit of a ride from town." She straightened her spine. "I am tired, but I can manage. I would rather start working as soon as possible." "Fair enough." He stood, moving to the counter where the clerk had begun piling supplies. "Add 2 sacks of flour, extra sugar and coffee, and see if you have any of that lavender soap left. My mother always said every woman should have nice soap." The clerk raised his eyebrows but added the items without comment. Bridget felt a strange warmth in her chest at Marcus's consideration. Lavender soap was a luxury she had not enjoyed in years. When everything was assembled and paid for, Marcus loaded the supplies into a wagon waiting outside. It was a sturdy vehicle pulled by 2 large mules who stood patiently in the heat. He lifted the heavy sacks as if they weighed nothing, his muscles flexing beneath his shirt. When everything was secure, he helped Bridget up onto the bench seat, his hands gentle despite their size and strength. The ride out of Fort Sumner took them north along a well-worn trail that led into gradually rising terrain. The desert scrub began to give way to pinyon pines and juniper as they climbed, and the air grew slightly cooler. Marcus handled the mules with easy competence, and Bridget found herself relaxing for the first time in days. "Tell me about yourself," Marcus said as they rolled along. "Where did you live before the mining camps?" "Kansas, originally. A small farm outside Wichita. My mother died when I was young and my father could not manage the farm alone. We lost it to debt when I was 8. After that, we moved west, following work wherever we could find it." "That must have been hard, all that moving." "It was all I knew. Father did his best, but he was a laborer, not a farmer or a businessman. We scraped by." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "He promised he would save enough to send me to school someday, so I could learn reading and writing and arithmetic. But the money never quite stretched that far." "You loved him," Marcus observed. "Very much. He was a good man, just unlucky. When he died, I felt like I had lost my last anchor to the world." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I felt the same when my parents passed, like I was adrift, even though I was a grown man with my own place. Family ties are important even when they are gone." They crested a rise, and the cabin came into view below them in a small valley. It was larger than Bridget had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The barn stood nearby, and she could see the garden plot Marcus had mentioned, currently overgrown with weeds. Chickens pecked in a fenced yard and 2 horses grazed in a corral. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "It will do." But she could hear the pride in his voice. "My father and brothers helped me build it 10 years ago before they all went their separate ways. I have been adding to it bit by bit since then." He pulled the wagon up to the porch and helped her down. Up close, she could see the cabin was well maintained, the logs chinked carefully against the weather, the roof solid. Marcus unlocked the heavy wooden door and pushed it open. The interior was dim and cool after the bright sunlight. As her eyes adjusted, Bridget took in a large main room dominated by a stone fireplace. A sturdy table with 4 chairs stood near the kitchen area, which featured a good stove and shelves for supplies. A comfortable-looking chair sat near the fireplace with a small table beside it, and a ladder led up to the loft. Everything was neat but dusty, like a place that was regularly used but not quite lived in. "I will bring your bedroll in and set it up over there," Marcus said, gesturing to a corner away from the ladder. "There are curtains in the chest under the window that you can hang for privacy if you like. The privy is out back, and the well is beside it." For the next hour, they worked together unloading the wagon and putting supplies away. Marcus showed her where everything belonged, explaining his system for organizing the pantry and the root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin. He introduced her to the chickens, 6 hens who eyed her suspiciously, and the horses, a tall bay gelding named Scout and a sturdy paint mare called Bess. "The mules are Jack and Jill," he added with a slight smile. "Not very original, but they answer to it." Despite her exhaustion, Bridget felt energy returning as she explored her new home. The garden would need serious work, she could see, but the soil looked good, and there were already some struggling vegetables that could be saved with proper tending. The chicken coop needed cleaning, and the cabin itself could use a thorough scrubbing, but these were tasks she knew how to do. This was work she could excel at. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus built a fire in the stove and showed her where he kept his stores of dried meat and beans. "Too late to cook much tonight. We will make do with something simple." "I can cook," Bridget said quickly. "Please let me. You have done so much today, and this is my job now." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I will see to the animals while you work." Alone in the cabin, Bridget set about making a simple meal of beans with salt pork, fried cornmeal cakes, and coffee. She found the rhythm of cooking soothing, familiar. This was something she knew, something she could do well. By the time Marcus returned, she had plates on the table and the coffee pot hot. He paused in the doorway, surprise crossing his face. "Smells good. It is nothing fancy," she warned. "But it will fill your belly." They ate together at the table, and Bridget found herself watching Marcus covertly. Now that she was not quite so desperate and exhausted, she could appreciate what an unusual man he was. Not just his size, though that was remarkable enough, but the quiet confidence he carried, the thoughtfulness in his actions. He had defended her to the clerk without knowing anything about her except that she needed help. That spoke to his character more than any words could. "This is good cooking," Marcus said, sopping up bean juice with a cornmeal cake. "Better than I manage for myself." "Thank you. My father taught me what he knew, and I learned the rest by watching other women in the camps." After dinner, Bridget washed the dishes while Marcus sat in his chair by the now dark fireplace. She was aware of him watching her work, but it did not feel intrusive. When she had finished and hung the damp towel to dry, she turned to find him pulling a book from a shelf she had not noticed earlier. "Are you very tired?" he asked. "Tired, but not ready to sleep yet. Too much has happened today." He nodded and settled back in his chair, opening the book. "Then I will read to you as I promised." Bridget felt a flutter in her chest. "You do not have to do that. The clerk was being cruel. You do not owe me anything." "I do not do things because I owe them," Marcus said, echoing his earlier words. "I do them because they seem right. Come sit where you can hear." She pulled one of the chairs from the table closer to his and sat down, smoothing her skirt nervously. Marcus adjusted the oil lamp to cast better light on the pages and began to read. His voice was deep and steady, and he read well, bringing the words to life. The book was a collection of stories, tales of adventure and heroes, of quests and dragons and magic. Bridget found herself leaning forward, caught up in the narrative. She had heard stories before, told around campfires by men trying to pass the time, but there was something different about hearing them read from a book, the words carefully chosen by someone who had thought them important enough to write down. When Marcus finally closed the book, full darkness had fallen outside. "That is enough for tonight," he said quietly. "We both need rest." "That was wonderful," Bridget said, her voice soft. "Thank you. We will do it again tomorrow night if you like. I have several books and I enjoy the reading myself." She stood, suddenly aware of how intimate this moment felt, the two of them alone in the lamplight. "Good night, Mr. Pierce." "Good night, Miss Calloway. Sleep well." Bridget made her way to the bedroll he had set up for her in the corner, grateful for the curtains that gave her privacy to change into the simple nightgown she had packed. As she lay down, exhaustion finally claimed her fully, but her mind was full of the day's events. This morning, she had been alone and desperate, facing mockery from strangers. Tonight she had a job, a home, and a man who had stood up for her without asking anything in return. She fell asleep to the sound of Marcus moving quietly in the loft above, settling down for the night, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt something that might have been hope. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost like belonging. Bridget rose with the sun and worked steadily through the days, tackling the neglected garden first. She pulled weeds and thinned the struggling plants, carried water from the well in heavy buckets, and coaxed the vegetables back to health. The chickens began laying more regularly once she cleaned their coop and established a feeding schedule. She scrubbed the cabin from top to bottom, washed curtains and blankets, and organized supplies with a care that pleased Marcus when he noticed. He was gone for 3 days that first week, returning with pelts strapped to Scout's back and fresh venison for the larder. When he came home to find the cabin transformed, clean and welcoming with a hot meal waiting, something shifted in his expression. He did not say much, but Bridget saw the appreciation in his eyes. True to his word, Marcus read to her every evening that he was home. Sometimes adventure stories, sometimes poetry, occasionally from the Bible, though neither of them was particularly religious. Bridget looked forward to these evenings with an eagerness that surprised her. She would finish the dishes and pull her chair close to his, and for an hour or more they would be transported to other worlds, other lives. One evening, about a month after she had arrived, Marcus closed his book and looked at her thoughtfully. "Would you like to learn?" he asked. Bridget blinked. "Learn to read and write. I could teach you if you wanted." Her heart gave a painful thump. "I am too old." "People learn such things as children." "Says who?" Marcus leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "My mother learned to read when she was 40, taught by a traveling preacher who stayed with us one winter. She always said it was like discovering a new world had been hiding in plain sight her whole life. But I have tried before," Bridget admitted. "When I was younger, a teacher in one of the camps offered lessons. I could not make the letters work. They just looked like scratches to me." "Maybe you needed a different teacher, or maybe you were too worried about other things to focus properly." His voice was gentle. "You are safe here, Bridget, fed and housed and not facing any immediate danger. Maybe your mind has room for learning now." The use of her first name sent a small thrill through her. They had been gradually moving away from the formal address, though she still called him Mr. Pierce most of the time. "I would like to try," she said slowly. "If you truly do not mind taking the time." "I do not mind at all." So their evening routine expanded. Marcus brought out a slate and chalk, and they began with letters. He was a patient teacher, never showing frustration when Bridget struggled with the shapes or forgot which letter made which sound. They worked through the alphabet slowly, then began combining letters into simple words: cat, dog, sun, moon, home. Bridget practiced during the days while Marcus was working, copying letters onto the slate until her hand ached. Some days were harder than others. Some days the letters still looked like meaningless scratches, and she wanted to throw the slate across the room in frustration. But Marcus would sit beside her in the evenings, his large hand guiding hers, showing her again how the letters flowed together. And slowly, painfully, understanding began to dawn. Summer deepened into early autumn. The garden produced abundantly under Bridget's care, and she spent long days preserving vegetables for the winter, filling the root cellar with jars of beans and tomatoes and pickles. She baked bread every few days, learning to manage the temperamental stove. She mended Marcus's clothes, taking pride in stitches so small they were nearly invisible. The work was hard, but she had been right that first day. She was good at it. The cabin had never been so well kept, Marcus told her. The meals had never been so consistently good. The animals had never been so healthy. He raised her wages without her asking, and when he went into Fort Sumner for supplies, he always returned with small gifts. A new dress that actually fit her properly, a ribbon for her hair, a pair of sturdy boots to replace her worn-out ones. "You do not have to keep buying me things," Bridget protested after he presented her with a beautiful wool shawl in deep green. "I want to," Marcus said simply. "You work hard. You deserve nice things." She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, feeling the soft wool against her skin. "Thank you. It is lovely." Something in the way he looked at her made her breath catch. His eyes seemed to trace her features, lingering on her face with an expression she could not quite read. Then he cleared his throat and looked away. "Weatherman in town says we are in for an early winter," he said. "I will need to do one more long trapping run before the snow flies, get enough pelts to see us through." "How long will you be gone?" Bridget tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to their evening readings and lessons, to the way he filled the cabin with his quiet strength. "Week, maybe 2. I hate to leave you alone that long, but it cannot be helped. I will be fine. I managed alone before." "That you did." He smiled at her, and she felt warmth bloom in her chest. "But you are not alone anymore, Bridget. You have a home here for as long as you want it." The words should have comforted her, but instead, they made her realize how much she had come to want. She no longer thought of this arrangement as simply employment. She thought of the cabin as home, of Marcus as something more than an employer. When had that shift happened? When had his return from his trips become the best part of her day? When had his smile started making her heart race? These were dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position. Marcus had offered her honest work and protection, nothing more. She could not mistake his kindness for anything deeper. And yet, when she caught him watching her sometimes, she wondered if perhaps his feelings had shifted too. He left 3 days later, the mules loaded with supplies and traps. Bridget stood on the porch and watched him ride away, feeling the cabin grow emptier with each step his horse took. She threw herself into work to distract herself, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that barely needed it. The Hendersons visited on the 5th day, bringing a basket of apples from their trees. They were a sweet older couple who clearly thought well of Marcus and had been curious about his new housekeeper. "He seems much happier lately," Mrs. Henderson observed while her husband examined the garden with an approving eye. "That boy has been alone too long, if you ask me. A man needs someone to come home to." Bridget felt her cheeks warm. "I just keep house for him." "For now, perhaps." Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled. "But I have seen the way he looks at you when you come to town together, and the way you look at him, for that matter." "Mrs. Henderson, please." "He is my employer, nothing more." "If you say so, dear. But mark my words, Marcus Pierce is not the kind of man to bring just any woman to his home. He must trust you and care for you a great deal to have you here." After they left, Bridget could not stop thinking about their conversation. Did Marcus look at her in any particular way? She had been trying so hard not to reveal her own growing feelings that perhaps she had missed signs of his. He returned on the 13th day, riding in just before sunset with a large load of pelts. Bridget heard the animals and rushed out to the porch, her heart leaping at the sight of him. He looked tired and worn, his beard fuller than when he had left, his clothes dusty from the trail. "Welcome home," she called, and then felt foolish. It was his home, not hers, even if she sometimes forgot that, but Marcus's face lit up when he saw her. He dismounted and climbed the porch steps, stopping just in front of her. "It is good to be back," he said quietly. "I miss this place. Just the place." The words slipped out before she could stop them. His eyes met hers. "No, not just the place." They stood there for a long moment, something unspoken hanging between them. Then Marcus cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should see to the animals. Is there supper? Beef stew and fresh bread. I will have it ready by the time you finish." Dinner felt different that night. The conversation was stilted, both of them seeming aware of something that had not been spoken aloud. When Bridget cleared the dishes, her hands trembled slightly. When Marcus pulled out his book for their evening reading, he seemed to have trouble focusing on the words. Finally, he closed the book without finishing the chapter. "Bridget, we need to talk." Her stomach dropped. "Have I done something wrong?" "No, God, no. You have been perfect." "That is actually the problem." He stood and paced to the fireplace, running a hand through his hair. "I have been trying to sort out my thoughts for weeks now, and these 2 weeks away gave me too much time to think." She waited, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. "When I brought you here, it was meant to be a business arrangement. You needed work, I needed help, simple and straightforward." He turned to face her, but somewhere along the way it stopped being simple. "Mr. Pierce," she began, but he held up a hand. "Marcus, please call me Marcus. And let me finish before I lose my nerve." He took a deep breath. "You have become important to me, Bridget, more important than I know how to say. When I am gone, I think about you constantly. I worry that you are safe, that you have everything you need. And when I come home, seeing you on that porch is the best part of my day." Bridget stood slowly, moving closer to him. "You are the best part of my days, too." "I am not good with words," Marcus continued. "I am a rough man, better with my hands than my tongue. But I need you to understand that my feelings for you have gone beyond employer and employee. I care for you, Bridget, deeply." "I care for you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, thinking it was inappropriate, but I cannot help it." Something like relief flooded his face. "Then I am not alone in this." "No, you are not alone." He closed the distance between them in 2 steps, his large hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made tears spring to her eyes. "I have wanted to do this for so long," he murmured, and then he was kissing her. His lips were soft despite his rough exterior, moving against hers with a tenderness that took her breath away. Bridget's hands came up to grip his shirt, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric. The kiss deepened, and she felt like she was falling, but Marcus's strong arms wrapped around her, holding her safe. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I have never felt this way about anyone," he said. "I need you to know that. This is not casual for me. Nor for me." Bridget's voice shook. "I thought I would be alone forever after my father died. I never imagined finding someone like you. Someone like me. A rough mountain man who spends half his time in the wilderness. Someone kind and patient and honorable. Someone who defended me when I was being mocked. Someone who reads to me every night and teaches me letters without ever making me feel stupid." She reached up to touch his bearded cheek. "Someone who makes me feel safe and cherished." Marcus turned his head to kiss her palm. "You are cherished. Make no mistake about that." They stood wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, neither wanting to break the moment. Finally, Marcus pulled back slightly. "We should do this properly," he said. "Court like respectable people. I do not want anyone in town thinking poorly of you. I do not care what people in town think. But I do. You have already been through enough, dealt with enough judgment." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I want to do right by you, Bridget. I want to marry you if you will have me, but I want to court you first. Take you to church socials and town dances. Let everyone see that you are a lady and that I am serious about my intentions." The word marriage made her heart skip. "You want to marry me?" "Eventually, yes. if that is what you want to, but there is no rush. We have time to be sure to do things properly." Bridget thought about this. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to bind herself to this good man before something happened to tear them apart. But another part appreciated his restraint, his desire to treat her with respect and honor. "Then we will court," she agreed. "Though I think we might be courting while living in the same cabin, which is rather unconventional," Marcus smiled. "We will be chaperoned by 6 chickens, 4 mules, and 2 horses. That seems respectable enough." She laughed, the sound bright and free. When was the last time she had laughed like that? She could not remember. That night, Marcus read to her as usual, but Bridget sat closer, her hand resting in his. When it was time to sleep, he kissed her good night, a sweet, chaste kiss that promised more in time. She went to bed with her heart full, her mind spinning with the possibilities of a future she had never dared imagine. The next months were the happiest of Bridget's life. Marcus was true to his word about courting her properly. They went to Fort Sumner together every few weeks, and he would walk with her through town, his hand at the small of her back, making his intentions clear to anyone watching. They attended church services together, Bridget dressed in one of the nice dresses Marcus had bought her, and if people gossiped about the mountain man and his housekeeper, neither of them cared. Bridget's reading progressed steadily. By October, she could read simple sentences. By November, she was making her way slowly through children's books. By December, she read her first full chapter on her own, looking up at Marcus with tears of pride in her eyes. "I did it," she whispered. "I really did it. You did." He pulled her into his arms. "I am so proud of you." Winter came early, just as the weatherman had predicted. Snow blanketed the foothills in white, and Marcus stayed closer to home, only making short trips for necessary supplies. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading together, practicing Bridget's writing and talking about everything and nothing. Marcus told her about growing up in the mountains, about learning to trap and hunt from his father, about the hard winters and the beautiful summers. Bridget told him more about her childhood, the good memories before her mother died, the lean years after. They learned each other's histories, each other's hopes and fears, and they fell deeper in love. Marcus was always respectful, never pushing for more than Bridget was ready to give. But the kisses grew longer, more passionate. The touches lingered. The longing grew stronger. They both knew where this was heading, and the anticipation was sweet. On Christmas Eve, snow falling softly outside, Marcus presented Bridget with a small wooden box he had carved himself. "Open it," he urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a ring. Simple but beautiful, a silver band with a small blue stone that matched Marcus's eyes. "Bridget Calloway," Marcus said, dropping to one knee beside her chair. "I know we said we would take our time, but I cannot wait any longer. I love you with everything I am. You have brought light and warmth and joy into my life. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Bridget's face. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms, kissing him through her tears, laughing and crying at the same time. She had come to Fort Sumner broken and desperate, and here she was 6 months later, engaged to a man who loved her exactly as she was. They married in the spring of 1873, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Sumner. Mrs. Henderson stood up with Bridget, and Mr. Henderson stood with Marcus. The clerk from the general store was there, looking rather uncomfortable. The preacher read the familiar words, and Bridget followed along in her own small Bible that Marcus had given her, able to read most of it now with only occasional help. When the preacher asked if she would take Marcus Pierce as her husband, she said, "I will," in a clear, strong voice that carried through the small church. When he asked if Marcus would take Bridget Calloway as his wife, Marcus said, "I will," with such conviction that several women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Marcus cupped Bridget's face in his large hands and kissed her sweetly, and she kissed him back, her husband, her love, her home. The wedding breakfast was held at the boarding house, and people came from all over to wish them well. Even the clerk approached them, looking sheepish. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Pierce," he said stiffly. "I was unkind when we first met. I judged you unfairly." "Thank you for saying so," Bridget said graciously, "but I have learned that a person's worth is not measured in letters on a page. Indeed." He glanced at Marcus, who stood protectively close. "You have made a good match, I think. Congratulations to you both." When they finally left the festivities and rode back to the cabin in late afternoon, both were tired but happy. Marcus lifted Bridget down from the wagon, but instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her up the porch steps and across the threshold of their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Pierce," he murmured against her hair. "I have been home for months," she replied, "but now it is official." That night, they truly became husband and wife, their joining tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love they had built through months of patience and courtship. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the loft bed, Bridget's head on Marcus's broad chest, listening to his heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she whispered, "nor did I." His fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "But here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Bridget was no longer just the housekeeper but the mistress of her own home. She took pride in every aspect of their life together, from the meals she cooked to the garden she tended. She continued her reading lessons, growing stronger every day. By summer, she could read the newspaper Marcus brought from town and write letters in a clear, steady hand. Marcus still went on his trapping trips, but they were shorter now. He hated being away from his wife, he said, and rushed home as quickly as possible. When he returned, their reunions were joyful, full of laughter and love and passion. The Hendersons became dear friends, visiting often and having them to dinner in return. Bridget found herself part of a community for the first time in her life, no longer an outsider looking in. The women of Fort Sumner accepted her as one of their own, teaching her quilting and preserving techniques, inviting her to sewing circles and church socials. In the fall of 1873, Bridget realized she was with child. She broke the news to Marcus one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there." He crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that belied his size and strength. "A baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" Bridget asked, though she could feel his joy in the trembling of his hands. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, maybe. Overwhelmed, but mostly just happy. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright. "You are going to be an amazing mother, and you will be an amazing father." They told the Hendersons first, who were delighted and immediately began planning all the things the baby would need. Mrs. Henderson promised to attend the birth, having delivered half the babies in the territory over the years. The news spread through Fort Sumner, and people they barely knew offered congratulations and advice. Bridget's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Marcus hovered over her constantly, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, driving her to distraction with his overprotectiveness. But she could not truly be annoyed when it came from such a place of love and concern. "I am growing a baby, not dying of consumption." she finally told him in exasperation when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of eggs from the chicken coop. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time while still managing their daily work. But you are my wife, Marcus said stubbornly. Carrying my child, let me take care of you. She softened at the worry in his eyes. You do take care of me every single day, but I need to feel useful too. I need to move and work. It is good for me and the baby. They compromised, with Bridget continuing her normal work, but accepting Marcus's help with the heavier tasks. He took over hauling water and chopping wood, split the firewood, carried the supply sacks from town. She managed the household, the cooking and cleaning and tending that kept their life running smoothly. In the evenings, Marcus still read to her, though now he often read to her belly as well, his large hand spread across the growing swell, talking to their unborn child about the world waiting outside. Your mama is the strongest, smartest woman I know, he would say. She learned to read and write because she was determined, and she can do anything she sets her mind to. You are going to be so lucky to have her as your mother. Bridget would run her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this gentle giant of a man who had transformed her life so completely. Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1874, arriving after a long but uncomplicated labor. Marcus paced the cabin like a caged bear while Mrs. Henderson attended Bridget, until finally the older woman opened the door to the porch where he had been banished. "Come meet your son," she said with a tired smile. Marcus burst into the cabin to find Bridget propped up in their bed, exhausted but glowing, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Marcus, meet Benjamin. Benjamin Marcus Pierce." He approached slowly, almost reverently, staring down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets. Benjamin had a shock of dark hair and was working his little fists in the air, making small, mewling sounds. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Marcus's eyes widened. "I am afraid I will break him." "You will not break him. Sit here beside me." Marcus sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Bridget transferred the precious bundle into his arms. He held Benjamin with utmost care, his large hands somehow exactly right for cradling a newborn. The baby's eyes opened, revealing blue-green eyes just like his father's, and seemed to stare right at Marcus. "Hello, son," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am your papa. I promise I am going to do everything I can to be the father you deserve. I am going to teach you everything I know and protect you and your mama with my life. You are the luckiest baby in the world because you have Bridget Calloway Pierce for your mother." Bridget wiped at her eyes, overcome. "We are all lucky. We are a family." "We are a family," Marcus repeated, looking between his wife and son with wonder on his face. The next weeks were exhausting but joyful as they adjusted to life with a newborn. Benjamin was a good baby, sleeping in stretches and feeding well. Marcus was a devoted father, waking with Bridget for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor when Benjamin was fussy. "I never knew I could love like this," he confessed one night, holding his sleeping son against his chest. "I thought what I felt for you was the peak of what my heart could hold, but somehow it just keeps expanding." "I know exactly what you mean," Bridget said. She was sitting in the chair by the window, working on a quilt for Benjamin's cradle. "Sometimes I look at the two of you and I can hardly believe this is my life." "What do you mean?" "Just 2 years ago, I walked into Fort Sumner with nothing but the clothes on my back and a few coins. I was desperate and alone and terrified. And then you appeared, this giant mountain man who defended me to a mean-spirited clerk and offered me a home. How did I get so lucky?" Marcus shook his head. I am the lucky one. You brought life to this cabin, Bridget. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me purpose and joy and now a son. Everything good in my life comes from you. We saved each other, I think. I think you are right. Summer passed in a blur of baby milestones and ranch work. Benjamin grew strong and healthy, his little personality emerging day by day. By fall, he was smiling and cooing, reaching for his parents' faces with chubby hands. The garden produced abundantly, and Bridget spent weeks preserving food for the winter while Benjamin napped in a basket near her feet. Marcus continued his trapping, but he never stayed away for more than a few days. He could not bear to miss too much of Benjamin's development, he said. Every morning he was home, he would scoop his son up and carry him out to see the animals, pointing out the chickens and horses, talking to him about the mountains and the forest. When Benjamin was 6 months old, Marcus began reading to him every night before bed, just as he had once read to Bridget in those early days. Now, all three of them would curl up together, Benjamin on Bridget's lap, and Marcus would read stories of adventure and magic. Benjamin would stare up at his father with rapt attention, as if he understood every word. "You think he is too young for stories?" Marcus asked once. "I think he loves the sound of your voice," Bridget replied. "And I think he is never too young to learn that books are treasures." Winter brought deep snow, and they were snowed in for weeks at a time. But the cabin was warm and well provisioned, and they had everything they needed. Marcus taught Bridget to play chess in the long evenings, and she proved a quick study, soon beating him more often than not. "You are too smart for me," he complained good-naturedly after she checkmated him in 15 moves. "You are the one who taught me to read and think strategically," she pointed out. "You have only yourself to blame." Benjamin celebrated his first birthday in May of 1875, with a small party attended by the Hendersons and a few other families from the area. He was walking now, toddling around the cabin and yard on unsteady legs, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of a young child. Marcus built him a small wooden horse on wheels that Benjamin pushed everywhere, and Bridget sewed him new clothes from soft fabric. "I cannot believe how fast he is growing," she said, watching Benjamin demolish the small cake she had made him. "He will be a strong boy," Marcus predicted. "Look at those shoulders already. He is going to be tall like his papa. Heaven help us, one giant in the family is enough." Marcus laughed and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "But you like this giant." "I love this giant," she corrected. "More than words can say." That summer, when Benjamin was 15 months old, Bridget realized she was pregnant again. The news was joyful but also tinged with nervousness. Benjamin was still so young, barely more than a baby himself. But Marcus was delighted, and his enthusiasm was contagious. "2 children," he said wonderingly. "Our family keeps growing." "You are not worried about how we will manage?" Bridget asked. "With you as their mother, they will be the luckiest children in the territory." He placed a hand on her still flat belly. "And I will work twice as hard to provide for our family. We will manage fine." Their daughter was born in March of 1876, arriving quickly in the early morning hours. Marcus barely had time to fetch Mrs. Henderson before Rose Marie Pierce announced her arrival with a lusty cry. "She has a good set of lungs," Mrs. Henderson observed, cleaning the baby and wrapping her snugly. Marcus held his daughter with the same wonder he had shown with Benjamin, though his hands were more confident now. "She is beautiful," he murmured. "She looks just like you, Bridget." It was true. Rose had Bridget's delicate features and light hair, though her eyes were the family blue-green. Benjamin toddled over to peer at his new sister with curiosity, and Marcus carefully helped him sit on the bed so he could see her better. "This is your sister, Rose," Marcus explained. You are a big brother now. That means you help protect her and watch out for her." Benjamin reached out a pudgy hand to touch Rose's tiny fist, and she immediately gripped his finger. "Mine," Benjamin announced. "Yes, she is your sister," Bridget confirmed, laughing. "But you have to be gentle with her." Life with two children was busy and chaotic, but Bridget thrived on it. Marcus had expanded the cabin, adding another room downstairs for the children to share as they grew. Benjamin was a good big brother, showing surprising gentleness with his baby sister. And Rose was a content baby, happy to be passed from person to person, smiling at everyone. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Benjamin started helping his father with small chores around the ranch, his chest puffing with pride when Marcus praised his work. Rose grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed her brother everywhere. Bridget's reading and writing skills grew stronger, and she began keeping detailed records of the ranch operations, and even writing occasional letters to distant relatives Marcus had back east. In 1878, their third child arrived, another son they named Thomas. By now, Bridget and Marcus were experienced parents, taking the sleepless nights and constant demands in stride. Benjamin was 4 now, Rose 2, and both were fascinated by their new baby brother. "Our house is full of blessings," Marcus said one evening, surveying the chaos of 3 children playing while Bridget cooked dinner. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life." "Do you miss the quiet?" Bridget asked. "The days when it was just you in this cabin, peace and solitude." Marcus pulled her into his arms, careful of the spoon she was holding. "Not for a single second. I did not know what I was missing until you walked into that general store. You gave me everything, Bridget. A home, not just a house. A family. A reason to come back from every trip. I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." She reached up to cup his bearded face, older now but no less handsome to her eyes. "I love you too. Thank you for defending me that day. Thank you for seeing past what I could not do to what I could do. Thank you for reading to me every night until I could read for myself." "Thank you for staying," Marcus replied, "for building this life with me, for giving me these beautiful children, for being exactly who you are." They kissed, a gentle touch that still held all the passion of their early days until Benjamin made a disgusted sound. "Mama and Papa are kissing again," he informed his siblings. Marcus laughed and released Bridget. "And I will kiss your mama every day for the rest of our lives, so you children had better get used to it." The children groaned, but they were smiling. They knew they were loved, that their parents' love for each other was part of what made their home so safe and happy. Over the next years, the Pierce family thrived. Marcus's trapping business did well, and he began expanding into other ventures, buying cattle and horses to raise. The ranch grew, and they hired occasional help during busy seasons. Benjamin grew tall and strong like his father, learning to trap and hunt and handle animals with skill. Rose proved to be gifted with gardens and animals, coaxing growth from even the most stubborn plants. Thomas, the baby, showed an early love of books and learning that reminded them both of Bridget's determination to educate herself. In 1882, Bridget gave birth to their 4th and final child, a daughter they named Lucy. She came as a surprise, arriving when Bridget was 30 and had assumed her childbearing days were over. But Lucy was welcomed with joy by the whole family, doted on by her older siblings and treasured by her parents. "Our family is complete now," Marcus said, holding tiny Lucy while his other children crowded around to see their new sister. 4 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and the love of my life by my side. What more could a man ask for?" "Nothing," Bridget agreed. "We have everything we need." As the children grew, Bridget made sure each of them learned to read and write at an early age. She remembered too well the shame of being illiterate, the limitations it had placed on her life. Her children would never struggle as she had. She taught them their letters as soon as they could hold a pencil, read to them every day, and encouraged their curiosity about the world. Marcus supported her fully in this, and together they created a home where learning was valued alongside hard work. Benjamin might spend his days working the ranch with his father, but his evenings were spent reading or practicing his arithmetic. Rose kept careful records of the garden yields and wrote poetry in a small journal Marcus bought her. Thomas devoured every book they could acquire, dreaming of becoming a teacher someday. Even little Lucy showed an early fascination with letters and numbers. The general store clerk, now much older and somewhat mellowed, once commented to Bridget when she was in town buying supplies. "Your children are the best educated in the territory," he said. "You and Mr. Pierce have done well with them." "Thank you," Bridget replied. "Education is important to us. We want them to have every opportunity." "That is admirable, especially considering—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Considering I could not read or write when I arrived in Fort Sumner," Bridget finished for him. "That is exactly why education is so important to me. I know what it is like to be limited by lack of learning. I would never let my children face those limitations. You have come far, Mrs. Pierce. I hope you know I regret my harshness that day when we met." "I forgave you long ago," Bridget said honestly. "That day led to everything good in my life. If you had been kind, perhaps I would have found employment elsewhere and never gotten to know Marcus, so in a way I should thank you for your cruelty." The clerk looked startled, then laughed. "That is a generous way of looking at it. You are a remarkable woman." "I am a woman who was given a chance when she needed it most," Bridget corrected, "and who worked hard to make the most of that chance. There is nothing remarkable about that." But there was something remarkable about it, and Marcus told her so that evening when she recounted the conversation. "You are remarkable," he insisted. "You took a bad situation and turned it into something beautiful. You taught yourself to read and write against all odds. You have raised 4 incredible children and managed this ranch better than I ever could alone. You are the strongest person I know." Bridget Pierce. She blushed at his praise even after all these years of marriage. "You are biased, maybe, but I am also right." He pulled her close and she settled against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I have never regretted for 1 second standing up for you that day. Best decision I ever made." "The best decision I ever made was accepting your offer of employment," Bridget countered, "and then falling in love with you. We made good decisions, it seems." They stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, their children's laughter drifting from inside the cabin. It was an ordinary moment in an extraordinary life they had built together. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their growing children. Benjamin married at 21, bringing home a sweet young woman named Sarah who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a small cabin on the far edge of the Pierce property and started their own family. Rose, at 18, fell in love with the Hendersons' grandson who had come west to work the family land. Their wedding was the social event of the year in Fort Sumner. Thomas went east to attend college, fulfilling his dream of becoming a teacher. He sent long letters home describing his studies and his adventures, and Bridget treasured every word. Lucy, the baby, grew into a spirited young woman who could outride most of the men in the territory and had a gift for training horses. Marcus and Bridget grew older together, their hair silvering, their faces marked by time and weather. But their love never dimmed. They still read together most evenings, though now Bridget read as often as Marcus did. They still held hands when they walked through their land. They still kissed like newlyweds, much to their children's continued mock disgust. One evening in the spring of 1895, 23 years after they had first met, Marcus and Bridget sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their grandchildren played in the yard while their grown children visited inside the cabin that had been expanded multiple times over the years to accommodate their large family. "You remember the day we met?" Marcus asked, his arm around Bridget's shoulders. "Every detail," she replied. "I was so desperate and scared. And then this giant of a man defended me to a cruel clerk and offered me a home. I knew the moment I saw you that you were special. Something in your eyes, the way you held your head high despite everything. You had dignity and strength even when you had nothing else. You gave me everything, Marcus. A home, a family, a life I never dreamed possible. You taught me to read and write. You showed me what love could be." "We gave each other everything," Marcus corrected. "This life we built it together. Every nail in every board, every seed in every garden, every word in every book. Together." Bridget leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling utterly content. "I would not change a single thing, nor would I." "Well, except maybe I would have kissed you sooner." She laughed, the sound bright and young despite her 53 years. "You kissed me at exactly the right time." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Inside, they could hear their children laughing, their grandchildren playing. The chickens settled into their coop for the night. The horses whickered softly in the corral. Everything was as it should be. "Read to me tonight," Bridget asked as the stars began to appear. "Always," Marcus promised. "I will read to you every night for the rest of our lives, just as I promised that first day. And I will listen, just as I did then, though now I could read it myself. But you do not have to. I like reading to you. It is our time together, just the two of us, even when we are surrounded by family." They went inside as the night deepened, Marcus pulling out a worn book of poetry they both loved. The family settled around them, the grandchildren on the floor, the adult children in chairs, everyone drawn to the nightly ritual that had been the foundation of Marcus and Bridget's relationship from the very beginning. Marcus began to read, his voice deep and sure, and Bridget closed her eyes to listen. She could still remember not knowing her letters, could still feel the shame she had carried into Fort Sumner that hot summer day. But she had learned and grown and built a life beyond anything she had imagined. All because a mountain man with kind eyes had said 4 simple words that changed everything. "Then I will read to her every night." He had kept that promise for over 2 decades, and Bridget knew with absolute certainty that he would keep it until their last days together. That was the kind of man Marcus Pierce was. That was the kind of love they had built together. When the reading was done and the family had dispersed to their own homes, Marcus and Bridget climbed to their loft bedroom, the same space they had shared since their wedding night all those years ago. They settled into bed, Marcus pulling Bridget close. "I love you, Bridget Pierce," he murmured into her hair. "More today than yesterday, just as I always say. And I love you, Marcus Pierce. Thank you for every day, every moment, every word you have read to me. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for defending me when I was mocked, for loving me when I felt unlovable. You were never invisible or unlovable. You were always remarkable. I just had the good sense to recognize it." They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for thousands of nights, and would do for thousands more. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and the stars wheeled overhead, and in the small valley where Marcus Pierce had built his cabin so long ago, a family slept peacefully, their lives intertwined by love and commitment, and 4 simple words spoken in defense of a desperate young woman. Then I will read to her every night. It was a promise that had blossomed into a lifetime, a love story that had started with mockery and defense, and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. Marcus and Bridget Pierce had built not just a family, but a legacy of love, learning, and loyalty that would echo through generations of their descendants. And every evening, for the rest of their long lives together, Marcus read to Bridget, not because she needed him to, but because they both wanted him to. It was their tradition, their connection, their way of honoring the beginning of their love story. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and thrive. Benjamin and Sarah had 5 children of their own, expanding the Pierce Ranch even further. Rose and her husband built a successful horse breeding operation. Thomas returned from the East with a teaching degree and his own wife, establishing a small school in Fort Sumner where he taught reading and writing to children whose parents had never had that opportunity, continuing his mother's legacy. Lucy married a surveyor who was mapping the expanding territories, and they had adventures all over the West before eventually settling near her parents, building yet another cabin on the Pierce land. The original cabin, where Marcus and Bridget still lived, became the heart of the family compound, the place where everyone gathered for celebrations and holidays. Marcus and Bridget grew old together with grace and dignity. Marcus's shoulders eventually stooped a bit, and his hands developed arthritis that sometimes made trapping difficult. Bridget's eyesight weakened, requiring spectacles for reading, though her mind remained sharp. But they were together, and that was what mattered. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, the noise and chaos a beautiful testament to the life they had built. Someone asked Marcus to tell the story of how he and Bridget met, and the room fell silent as he began. "I walked into the general store for supplies," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. "And there was this young woman, dusty and tired, asking for work. The clerk, bless his soul, he has since passed on, was cruel to her, mocked her for not knowing her letters, and I looked at this brave young woman who had walked through the desert alone to find a new life, and I thought she deserved better than mockery." "What did you say, Grandpa?" one of the youngest grandchildren asked. Marcus smiled and looked at Bridget, who was watching him with the same love in her eyes that she had shown for 3 decades. "I said I would read to her every night, and I have kept that promise every day since. Every day." Another grandchild asked in wonder. "Every single day that we have been together," Bridget confirmed. "Your grandfather is a man of his word." "And Grandma," Benjamin added, "Mama learned to read and write, did you know that? She taught herself with Papa's help. And then she taught all of us, and made sure we could all read and write well. That is why this family values education so highly." The children looked at Bridget with new eyes, understanding for the first time the significance of her journey. She had not just learned to read, she had transformed that personal victory into a gift for her entire family, and beyond through her insistence that all children deserved education. "I had the best teacher," Bridget said, reaching for Marcus's hand, "and the best reason to learn. I wanted to be worthy of the faith your grandfather showed in me." "You were always worthy," Marcus said firmly. "I just gave you the tools to show the world what I already knew." The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually the family dispersed, until it was just Marcus and Bridget once more in their cabin. Marcus pulled out a book, and Bridget settled into her chair beside him, just as she had done thousands of times before. "Same book as our wedding night?" she asked, recognizing the worn volume. "Seems fitting for our anniversary." He began to read, and Bridget closed her eyes, listening to the familiar words in her husband's beloved voice. 30 years of marriage, 23 years before that of knowing him, working beside him, loving him. 53 years old now, having started her real life at 19 in desperate circumstances. Every year had been a gift. When Marcus closed the book, Bridget opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it took her breath away, even after all this time. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived. That I would go back and live every day exactly the same if given the choice. That I love you more now than I thought was humanly possible. No regrets, not a single one. You." Bridget stood and moved to sit on his lap, something she had not done in years but felt compelled to do now. He wrapped his strong arms around her, and she laid her head on his shoulder. "My only regret is that we do not have more years ahead of us," she said honestly. "I want to spend eternity with you, Marcus Pierce." "Then we will," he said simply. "Somehow, someway we will. A love like ours does not end just because the body fails. It goes on forever." They sat there in the lamplight, two people who had started as employer and employee, become friends, fallen in love, married, raised a family, and built an empire of sorts from nothing but determination and devotion. They had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs. They had buried loved ones and welcomed new life. They had grown together, changed together, loved each other through everything. And every night, Marcus had read to Bridget, keeping a promise made in defense of a young woman being mocked by a small-minded clerk, a promise that had become the foundation of everything good in both their lives. As they finally climbed to bed that anniversary night, both tired but content, Bridget whispered, "Thank you for reading to me." "Thank you for listening," Marcus replied. "And thank you for everything else, for choosing me, for staying with me, for building this beautiful life with me." "There was never any choice to make," Bridget said. "From the moment you defended me, from the moment you offered me a home, I knew you were the man I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. And you were the woman I did not know I needed, until I saw you standing in that dusty dress with your head held high despite everything." They drifted to sleep. Their lives intertwined so completely that neither could remember a time before the other. In the morning, they would wake to another day of family and work and love. There would be meals to cook and animals to tend and grandchildren to spoil. There would be laughter and occasional tears, triumphs and setbacks, all the normal chaos of a large, loving family. And when evening came, Marcus would pull out a book and read to his wife, honoring the promise that had started it all, the 4 simple words that had changed 2 lives completely. "Then I will read to her every night." It was more than a promise. It was a love story. It was a commitment. It was everything that Marcus and Bridget Pierce had built together over decades of devotion. And they lived that love story fully, completely, joyfully, until the end of their days, proving that sometimes the most profound love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that defending someone when they are vulnerable can change not just their life, but yours as well. The Pierce family continued to grow and thrive long after Marcus and Bridget were gone, their descendants carrying on the values of education, hard work, and devotion that their matriarch and patriarch had instilled. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold through generations, a reminder that love often comes when least expected, and that true worth is measured not in letters on a page, but in the content of one's character and the depth of one's commitment. In the cemetery outside Fort Sumner, 2 headstones stand side by side, bearing the names Marcus Pierce and Bridget Calloway Pierce, with a single line beneath their names and dates that captures the essence of their love story. He read to her every night, and she listened with her heart. It was a fitting epitaph for a love that had started with mockery and defense, grown through patience and teaching, flourished in commitment and partnership, and lasted through every trial life could offer. Marcus and Bridget Pierce had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful that outlasted them both. And somewhere in heaven, perhaps Marcus still reads to Bridget every night, his deep voice bringing stories to life while she listens with the same rapt attention she showed that first evening in the cabin, when a mountain man kept his promise to a young woman who could not read, and changed both their lives forever. Their love story ended not with death, but with continuation, as their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the lessons they had learned. Education remained paramount in the Pierce family. Kindness to those in need was expected. Hard work was valued. And every generation knew the story of how it all began, with a desperate young woman and a compassionate mountain man and 4 simple words that became a lifelong promise. Then I will read to her every night. And he did, faithfully, lovingly, completely, for all the days of their lives together. It was a promise that became a tradition that became a love story, and a love story that became a legacy lasting far beyond 2 lives, touching everyone who heard it with the simple truth that real love is found not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of devotion, repeated faithfully, year after year, until the very end. Marcus and Bridget Pierce lived their love story fully, and when their time came, they died peacefully within months of each other, neither willing to be parted from the other for long. They left behind 4 children, 17 grandchildren, and countless great-grandchildren, all carrying forward the values they had instilled and the love they had modeled. But more than that, they left behind a story that reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest acts of human decency. That learning is never impossible if you have the right teacher, and that a promise made and kept can become the foundation for everything beautiful in life. The end.